Now it's a known fact that end grain to end grain or end grain to edge grain is just not a great joint. And you see a lot of that in miters like this. Now granted, that miter can be reinforced with a dowel or maybe a biscuit, but it takes something to make that end grain to end grain miter joint a little bit stronger. Here is one of the strongest joints in woodworking, and it's called a half lap. And again, it's end grain to edge grain here, but using half laps provides such a huge gluing surface area that you get a great, exceptionally strong joint. So what if I could combine the strength of a half lap with the beauty of a miter? The process is actually really easy. You get a beautiful joint and the strength of a half lap. It's a perfect marriage. It's easy to do. It's done on a table saw with a regular blade and a dado blade. Here's how it works. To demonstrate this joint, I'm going to make a frame. First, I'll cut miters on each side of the parts I've labeled A. I'm also leaving my stop block in place, and I'll need it there for the next operation. Now I'm going to change out the straight blade for a 3/4 inch dado blade. On a couple of pieces of scrap, the same thickness as the material I'm planning on making my miters, I set up the dado blade and made multiple passes until those two edges match perfectly. I've reoriented the miter gauge to 90 degrees, and now I'm cutting the half flaps on the back of each one of these pieces, making sure the letter A is up. And I want that half flap to cut from the inside corner of each one of those miters all the way out to the end. And I'll do that on all 4 sides. And when I'm done, remove the stop block, and again, use the dado blade to clean up the rest of that half lap. Now, cutting the half laps on part B is similar to the way we did part A, but I'm going to flip part B over so that the lettering is actually facing away from me. This way, after I'm done with the half laps, when I put that joint back together again, all the A's and B's will be up, and I'll have the same layout that I started with. I'm starting with the miter gauge on the left side, and I'm cutting the first pass on one end of each of the B pieces. After I finish that first cut, I'll remove the stop and finish up the half flaps on the balance of each one of those edges. Now I move my miter gauge to the right side of the table saw, and I'll use the dado blade to cut the first cut on each one of those edges. And when I'm done, remove the stop block, and again, use the dado blade to clean up the rest of that half lap. After I made my final cuts at the table saw, I did a little test fit to make sure that everything fit well. Then I went to the workbench and applied glue to all of the joints and a band clamp to pull everything into square. Once the glue set, I then did some light sanding wherever necessary. So now here is our finished frame. If you remember, we started by talking about one of the strongest joints in woodworking, and that's a half lap joint. So what I did here was combine the techniques of a half lap into a miter, which is generally about the weakest of all joints. So the goal is to create an exceptionally strong joint that has some beauty as well. This is another technique that once you learn it and start practicing it, you'll probably never go back to a standard miter. This is really nice and strong. Now, if this were my frame, I would add a rabbet to the inside back edge here for what I'm planning on putting in there, and probably a decorative edge around here to add a little bit of interest. I think you're going to be thrilled with the results. Learn this, practice it, and you'll do it all the time.